The soup was still steaming on the table, untouched, when my father's voice cut through the silence. "Leave this house. You're a failure." My name is Elena, 32 years old. I sat there, hands trembling on the spoon, watching steam blur the edges of my reflection in the broth. I didn't argue. His words slid across the table like knives, cutting through the quiet dinner my mother tried to salvage. "You heard me, Elena," he repeated, tapping his fingers against the oak surface. "You've lost your job. You're no provider, no daughter worth respect. Pack your things by morning." The clink of glass echoed when my wife, set down her wine. She didn't look at me. Instead, her hand brushed against the sleeve of another man seated beside her. He leaned closer, whispering something that made her lips curl into a smile I hadn't seen in months. The chair beneath me felt unsteady, though it didn't move. My chest burned. I wanted to shout to ask how betrayal could sit so comfortably at a family dinner. Instead, I swallowed the taste of iron in my mouth. Silence was the only armor I had left. A key rested heavy in my pocket. My father's eyes never left me, daring me to fight back. He thought he had one. He thought the story ended with me leaving. But they didn't know. They didn't know the documents bearing my name, the business no one could touch, or the luxury house by the sea. Its windows facing the horizon where silence wasn't punishment but freedom. I glanced at the candle flickering between us, wax dripping slowly down its stem. It reminded me of myself, melting, reshaping, but never extinguished. My wife leaned back, brushing her hair behind her ear. The other man adjusted his tie, proud, as though he'd already replaced me. My father reached for the breadbasket, his command hanging in the air like a verdict already sealed. I let the silence stretch, let it press into their comfort. My voice, when it came, was soft enough that only the nearest could hear. "All right." I rose, steady, my chair scraping against the tiles. The sound made every head turn. No anger, no tears, just the quiet weight of something they couldn't measure, because they thought loss defined me. But loss was only a disguise. I walked out that night not broken, but hidden. And hidden things, when revealed, carry the sharpest light. Have you ever had family cross your boundaries and call it love? Let me know in the comments. I closed the door gently behind me, the key in my pocket pressing against my palm. And for the first time, I felt its weight not as burden, but as promise. The night air pressed cool against my face as I stepped outside. The porch light hummed, casting a yellow glow on the chipped wooden steps. Behind me, laughter rose again, muffled by walls I once called home. My father's voice blended with my wife's giggle, and the man's deeper tone followed, wrapping around them like smoke. I stood there for a moment, staring at the driveway where my car sat waiting. The leather briefcase in the back seat carried documents none of them had ever bothered to ask about. A business license, contracts, a deed, proof that failure was the costume they had draped over me, but never the truth. When I slid behind the wheel, the steering wheel felt colder than usual, as if the car knew I wasn't returning. I drove with no destination at first, the road stretching empty beneath the stars. My mind wasn't on traffic lights or turns. It was on the fragments of voices still echoing in my skull. "Leave this house. You're a failure. She deserves better. Don't come crawling back." Each sentence clung to me like thorns. But beneath the sting, a strange calm grew. Because, while they thought they were burying me, I knew what waited beneath the surface. A life they couldn't touch. By midnight, I reached the coast. Waves slammed against the rocks with a rhythm that felt like breathing. My house, hidden behind a wrought iron gate and walls covered in bougainvillea, stood proud under the moonlight. White stone, glass walls reflecting the sea, balconies opening to salt and air. I unlocked the door, the key sliding smoothly into place. Inside, the silence was different. Not sharp, not condemning. It was peace. The kind of silence that didn't demand explanations. I dropped my coat on the arm of a chair and walked barefoot across the marble floor. My reflection followed me in the tall windows, blurred against the restless sea. On the dining table lay the contracts I'd signed weeks earlier. The business was still young but registered in my name alone. Clients were already waiting for my response. My phone buzzed with an email notification. Another proposal, another chance. They thought I had lost everything. But loss is only visible to those who never looked deeper. I poured myself a glass of water, the sound echoing in the stillness. I raised it as if in a toast to absence, to silence, to beginnings that sprout in places no one believes you planted seeds. And that night I made a quiet promise. I would not chase them. I would not beg. Instead, I would let truth grow louder than their laughter. The waves outside crashed like applause no one else could hear. Morning sunlight bled through the glass walls, painting the floor with gold. I hadn't slept much, but my body felt strangely weightless, like the ache of yesterday had turned into fuel. I brewed coffee, the steam curling upward, reminding me of the untouched soup back at my father's table. Their words still lingered, but they didn't taste the same anymore. They were losing their sting, becoming something else, proof of how little they ever knew me. The phone buzzed. Another email, this time from a client overseas, their name heavy with influence. They wanted a meeting, today. I smiled faintly. Timing had a way of mocking cruelty. When the world calls you worthless, life sometimes whispers back, watch this. I dressed in silence. A navy suit, crisp white shirt, and the watch my mother had once given me before she chose silence over defense. As I fastened it around my wrist, I wondered if she remembered the gift, if she even cared anymore. Still, I wore it, not for her, but because it reminded me that not every gesture fades, even when people do. Driving into the city, I passed streets I used to dread. The office where I had been dismissed. The cafe where my wife used to meet me for lunch, before she started whispering into another man's ear. For the first time, I didn't feel hollow driving past. Their shadows couldn't follow me here. The meeting was held in a tall glass tower. I walked into the conference room with documents in hand, contracts already stamped with my signature. They looked at me not as a failure, not as the discarded daughter from last night's dinner, but as a partner. The deal was sealed by noon. Numbers inked into reality. Enough to not just sustain, but to grow. As I shook hands with the final executive, one of them glanced at me and said, "You carry yourself as if you've been underestimated before." I only smiled. Underestimation had become my camouflage. When I returned to my seaside home, I placed the new contract on the table beside the candle from last night. The wax had hardened in jagged shapes, frozen mid-drip. I touched it lightly, realizing it no longer resembled melting. It resembled armor. My phone lit up again. This time it wasn't business. It was my brother. A message blinking on the screen. "Dad says you need to come back and face what you've done." I laughed softly, the sound echoing against the sea view windows. Face what I've done? No. They were the ones who would have to face what I'd built. And soon they would. The message from my brother lingered on the screen long after the notification faded. Face what you've done. Done? I whispered the word into the stillness of my seaside home, as if it might answer back. The only reply was the rhythm of the ocean colliding with the rocks. By evening, another message arrived, this time from my wife. Or perhaps I should already call her by another title. "Don't embarrass yourself. Everyone knows you're finished. Dad was right. Please stop pretending." Her words were coated in sugar, but the venom leaked through. I read them once, twice, then set the phone face down. She didn't deserve a response. Not yet. Instead, I went to the balcony. The air smelled of salt and beginnings. In the distance, sailboats dotted the horizon, their sails like fragments of torn letters drifting across the sky. I thought of how quickly family rewrites your story when it suits them. One day you're a pillar. The next, You're rubble under their feet. But rubble has sharp edges too. I returned inside, my eyes falling on the folder of property deeds. The house by the sea wasn't the only asset in my name. There was land inland, farmland I had purchased quietly, while they laughed at my reckless spending. They thought vacations and parties were my distraction. They never guessed I was buying silence, brick by brick, until it turned into foundation. I opened the drawer and pulled out a photograph, one I hadn't looked at in years. It was of me, my wife, and my father standing outside my old workplace the day I got promoted. My father's hand had been heavy on my shoulder, pride etched into his face. My wife's smile had been brighter then, untouched by shadows. The photo bent easily between my fingers. I didn't rip it. Not yet. Instead, I placed it beside the hardened candle wax. Symbols of what once seemed solid, now brittle. At midnight, another buzz. This time, my brother again. They're saying you abandoned responsibility, that you left debts behind. People are talking. I chuckled, shaking my head. They didn't even realize how loud their desperation sounded. Their narrative was cracking. Because debts? I had none. I had built everything quietly, cleanly, with precision. Their voices were turning frantic, because they were beginning to sense the truth. I poured a glass of wine, the liquid catching the moonlight. I lifted it toward the empty room and whispered, to masks slipping, to truths uninvited. And somewhere deep inside, I knew the first fracture in their perfect facade had already begun. The next morning arrived not with peace, but with an unexpected knock. 3 sharp raps against the glass front door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the curtain I saw him, my brother, his face pale, his suit wrinkled, as if he had been pacing all night before deciding to drive here. When I opened the door, he didn't greet me. He didn't even step inside. His eyes darted over my shoulder, scanning the marble floors, the ocean view stretching beyond the glass walls. "You've been here all along?" he asked, his voice low, almost accusing. I didn't answer right away. I let silence do the work. Silence has a way of peeling people open. Finally, I said, "Yes." "Why?" He swallowed, shifting uncomfortably. "Dad thinks you're lying. About everything. He says you ran away because you're broke. Because you couldn't handle responsibility." I smiled faintly. "And you believed him?" His jaw tightened. He didn't say yes, but the silence confirmed it. I stepped aside. "Come in." He hesitated, then walked into the foyer. His shoes clicked against the polished floor as his eyes roamed, widening with each turn. The house itself spoke louder than I ever could. The high ceilings, the art on the walls, the endless blue sea beyond. "This is yours," he whispered. "Everything in it," I replied. He pressed his lips together. I could see the cracks forming, not just in his belief, but in the narrative they'd spun against me. I guided him to the dining table. The folder of contracts and deeds still sat there, a quiet testimony. I opened it deliberately, letting him glimpse the signatures, the stamps, the numbers that didn't lie. His face drained of color. "Does Dad know?" "No," I said softly. "And he doesn't need to. Not yet." He slumped into a chair, rubbing his forehead. "They've been laughing at you. All of them. Calling you a failure. Telling everyone you'll come crawling back. But if they knew this," his voice trailed off, tangled between guilt and awe. I leaned closer, my voice calm. "That's the difference, brother. They built their pride on breaking me. I built my silence into something stronger." He looked at me for the first time, really looked. And in his eyes I saw something shift, doubt giving way to realization. "Dad won't recover from this," he muttered. I leaned back, watching the sea shimmer through the window. They don't even know the tide has already turned. For 2 days after my brother's visit, the phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Calls, messages, even voicemails laced with urgency. My father's voice sharp and commanding. My wife's shrill with contempt. And in between, relatives, cousins, uncles, each carrying fragments of their chosen script. I let them all go unanswered. Silence was my reply. But on the third evening, another knock echoed through the house, this time heavier, deliberate. When I opened the door, it wasn't my brother. It was my father. His posture still carried authority, but there was something unfamiliar in his eyes, a flicker of unease, like a man approaching ground that felt unstable. He stepped inside without invitation, gaze sweeping across the house with disbelief he tried to mask. "So this is where you've been hiding," he said flatly. I closed the door behind him. "Not hiding, living." He turned sharply, his jaw tightening. "Don't play games, Elena. People are talking. They're saying you've bought property, started some business. All while your family believed you had nothing." I met his stare, steady and unflinching. "That's because you never asked. You only declared." His breath hitched, almost imperceptibly. "You should have told me. We could have." "No," I interrupted. "You told me to leave. You stripped me of a home, called me a failure in front of strangers. You never wanted the truth. You wanted control." The silence between us thickened. The ocean roared outside as though it, too, demanded to be heard. Finally, he moved toward the dining table, his eyes falling on the folder of documents my brother had already seen. He flipped it open with a trembling hand. Contracts, stamped approvals, proof undeniable. His voice cracked when he spoke again. "You built all this?" "Yes." "And you didn't think to share it with your family?" I let out a quiet laugh. "Family? The ones who laughed while my wife leaned against another man? The ones who ordered me out as though I were furniture too worn to keep?" He shut the folder abruptly, his fist pressing against the table. For the first time I saw his power falter. Pride was draining out of him, replaced by something harsher. Fear. "They won't forgive this," he whispered. I stepped closer, lowering my voice until it was a blade of sound. "They don't need to. Forgiveness was never part of this story. What they need is to realize that I was never theirs to break." He looked at me, eyes rimmed with something raw, regret, or perhaps recognition. But I didn't flinch, because in that moment, for the first time in years, it wasn't me standing small before him. It was him shrinking before me. The days that followed were a quiet storm. My father had left without a word, but his silence spoke louder than his anger ever had. And soon enough, the rest of them came circling. Cousins sent veiled messages. "We should talk, maybe work together." An aunt called late at night, her voice sugar-sweet. "Family is family, Elena. Don't let misunderstandings keep us apart." Even my wife, the woman who once turned her back so easily, texted, "Maybe we should meet. Just to talk." Talk. As if words could rewrite betrayal. But the most telling sign came not from them, but from the bank. My manager called, her tone cautious. "Your father tried to access accounts that are no longer under his authority." He seemed confused when we told him. Confused. That word lingered with me. For a man who thrived on control, confusion was a collapse. That evening, I sat on the balcony, the candle on my table flickering low. The wax, once jagged, was now smoothed by the heat of repeated burns, no longer armor but resilience. I traced the hardened edges with my fingertip, realizing how much it mirrored me. My brother returned again, this time without hesitation. He walked straight into the living room, his face pale. "They're unraveling," he said quietly. "Dad, he doesn't know how to face anyone. He told people you tricked him. But everyone's seen the documents now. They're asking questions." I looked at him calm. "Good. Let the questions grow." He sat across from me, his voice dropping. "You don't understand. It's not just gossip anymore. Uncle tried to sell off part of the land, but when they checked the papers, your name was there. You own it all." The sea outside crashed hard, like applause breaking into laughter. "They built their pride on my silence," I murmured. "Now silence is dismantling them." My brother pressed his hands together, torn between admiration and fear. "They'll beg soon, Elena. They'll ask for mercy." I turned to him, eyes steady. Mercy is given to those who fall by accident. This was their choice. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the clock. In that ticking, I felt something shift. The power wasn't in what I owned, it was in what I withheld. And as night swallowed the horizon, I realized the final act wasn't about proving anything. It was about letting them see themselves in the mirror they had tried to shatter me with. And once that mirror turned, they would never look at themselves the same way again. The final call came on a Sunday morning. My father's voice, worn and brittle, filled the voicemail. Elena, come home. Please. We didn't know. The house, the land, the contracts, they're all under your name. We can't move without you. Just don't abandon us. Don't abandon me. For a long while, I let the words sit in the air. I replayed them once, twice, then set the phone down beside the hardened candle stub, a symbol of all the nights I had burned quietly, reshaping myself in their absence. I drove to the old house later that afternoon. The gates were still open, the driveway unchanged. But the atmosphere was different, heavy, fragile, like the place itself knew its throne had cracked. Inside, I found them gathered in the living room. My father, slouched in the armchair that once carried authority. My wife, eyes darting nervously, her hands twisting the hem of her blouse. The man she had clung to was absent now, and the relatives, cousins, uncles, aunts, sat in strained silence, waiting for me to speak. For the first time, every eye in that room turned to me, not with mockery, but with need. I walked slowly to the center, my heels clicking against the floor. I placed the folder of documents on the coffee table, the sound sharp as thunder in the stillness. This, I began softly, is what silence built. While you laughed, while you ordered me out, while you whispered that I was finished, I was building. No one dared interrupt. My father lowered his gaze, shame spilling across his features like cracks in stone. I don't owe you forgiveness, I continued. I don't owe you explanations. What I own is mine, and what you tried to strip away from me was never yours to take. My wife opened her mouth, her voice trembling. Elena, I made a mistake. I looked at her, steady. No, you made a choice. The room trembled with silence. No more protests, no more commands, just the weight of truth settling like dust that would never lift. I picked up the photograph I'd brought, the one of us smiling outside my old workplace. Without a word, I placed it face down on the table. A symbol, not torn, not burned, just laid to rest. Then I turned and walked out. The air outside was crisp, the sky streaked with fading sunlight. The sea's roar greeted me as I returned home, my silence, my proof. And in that moment, I realized revenge had never been about destroying them. It was about reclaiming me.